just wait 1 second.
They're going to live stream it for whom?
We're live streaming on Facebook.
For whom?
For the people who want to see it. There are a lot of people who are not necessarily in the village who are looking at it.
There are people who can see it on Zoom now?
Not on Zoom, on Facebook and on YouTube.
What do they see it on?
On their computers.
I messed it up.
Oh, it's a YouTube. I didn't hear.
They're also on Facebook.
I didn't hear.
I don't want to do this on
I don't like watching it.
I don't always find that.
I'll try again. Right now?
Morning, everybody. Welcome. Well, morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Can we turn our cell phones off, please?
Okay. Good idea. So we're live streaming on Facebook, and this is going to be going on YouTube. So if you don't want your voices to be on the video. First, I want to extend again a thank you to the people who are sponsoring this, Rita Geller primarily, and then someone else came forward when it looked like we were running short on Gemaras. Another lady asked me if she could sponsor them. She didn't want her name to be known, but we have more Gemaras on order. So if you don't have a book yet, there will be more coming within the next few days. We just authorized the invoice this morning. Also, I want to thank the people who sponsor all the learning programs here at Torah.org. Just quickly to go through their names. Sue and Arnie Garlick, Sharon and Fred Lisker and family, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, Friends of Avi Gittler, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of Toby Paris, the Friends of Joe Wolf, Charlie Gelfenstein, Sam Levine, Friends of Steve Victor, Rebecca Lewis and Susan Witansky, Edith Vigder, Michael and Judy Paretsky, Mira and Herschel Sennett, Clara and Jonas Weiser, Oscar and Shelley Moll, Paul and Carol Schwartz, Manny and Carol Meller, Walter and Sippy Fried, Moshe and Carol Gassner, Aliza Poliev, and Mayor and Miriam Kokowski. So we thank all of them, and we appreciate the fact that they are providing financial support for all the programs. It's not working? Okay. So good. So we are recording for YouTube. Facebook will have to get the video from us later. So we spoke last time a little bit about the history, how the Talmud came about, and what was the internal situation? Why was it that the oral law needed to be put into writing? Because originally that was not the intent. We had a written law, our Torah, and the oral law, which is what we're studying. And so last time we talked about how it came about that eventually the decision was made to put it into writing. But what was going on in the world at the time, and how did the rest of the world view us? After all, by that time, we were dispersed, and for centuries, basically, it was done by manuscripts, and when you pass something around by manuscript, it's very difficult, very expensive, not so widespread. And then in the 16th century, Pope Leo X gave permission to print the Talmud. Pretty surprising, based on the way we live today, that we'd need a pope to give us permission to print it, but that's what happened. And the first edition of the Talmud that was printed by the Bomberg family, non-Jewish family in Venice. That was done in 1520. And then there was another edition that was done in Basel, and they were promptly burned, not too long afterwards. And it took a while, really, until many copies were made and they were disseminated. And eventually, in the 17th and 18th century, and again, continuing that system of getting permission from a pope to print our holy Talmud, finally in the 17th and 18th century, what we call the Vilna Talmud, and also there was one that was done in another town called Slavuta, both of these in Poland, Lithuania, that part of Eastern Europe. And what we have today, basically what we're looking at here, that is the derivative of the Vilna Talmuds. This is something that got started in the 17th and 18th century. And of course there was a lot of censorship took place because there are many references within the Talmud to situations that make certain people uncomfortable. And so they've asked us, or they didn't ask, they required that there be censorship, plus the fact that there was some burning, and that even those that survived, eventually what developed was offset printing. And you know, offset printing is basically like taking a photo of what you have. And if you have errors in the original, those errors are going to continue. In modern times, let's say the last 50, 60 years, there's been an effort underway to correct a lot of those errors. And what you see in front of you, this is done by Rabbi Steinsaltz and his institute. And they've been very scrupulous in trying to bring back the original form of the text. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But the key is that in many different editions, and maybe what you have at home, or maybe you had from parents or whatever, it could be a little bit older edition, and some of the words are going to be a little bit different. And we're going to get into a little bit of that today, actually, with the first word of our Masechta, because there is what's called girsa. Girsa means the text, and there are different versions of the text. So before we get into that, let's talk about what's happening on the page. So if you have the Hebrew, right? And if you have, those of you that have the book, it's on page 198 on the Hebrew side. So it's the same thing that I have up here, you have in front of you. So if your eyesight is like mine, you really can't see it so often back there, but don't worry, it's all here. So the way that the page is laid out is, first of all, we have the page number. And if you see up there the page number, so right there, that's on the back side. Every page of the Gemara basically has two sides, and we talk about studying Daf Yomi, for example, right, which is what people are doing all around the world. So each page has two sides. So the first page has the Hebrew letter on it, and then you turn it over, it has the Arabic number. So since we're starting from here, so that's what I'm showing you. But on the flip side of this, you'll see there'll be the Hebrew letter. That's the number. And the way that the pages are quoted, so if somebody says that I saw in the Gemara Psachim on Daf Tzadik Tes Amid Beis, it's page Tzadik Tes 99 rather, folio B. That's what we're doing right now. And then you have in the middle of on the top, you have first of all the page number. Then next to that, you have first the Hebrew letter or the English letter. Then you have the heading, right? This is a heading. So the heading, first of all, this is the chapter that we're in. What number chapter is it? Right? This is the 10th chapter. Okay? And this is the name of our Masechta, Psachim. Okay? So when you look at a page and you see this across the top, you can identify where you are in the Gemara. Okay? Then, the way that the page itself is laid out, this part in the center, that's the actual Talmud. So you have the Mishnah and the Gemara, that's the actual Talmud. And then you have all around here are the commentaries. Okay? On the inside, so I'm not saying left or right, it happens to be on this page, it's on the left. But when you flip over to the next folio, next page is going to be on the right. But on the inside, closest to the binding, we have Rashi. Okay, so Rashi is the most famous and most thorough of all the commentaries, and we couldn't understand the Chumash, the Torah, the Gemara without Rashi. So that's Rashi. He was active like 12th century in France. And he wrote an extensive commentary, and we'll do some of that. Opposite him, this is called Tosfos, which means additions, additions, not additions, additions. And Tosfos, many of them were Rashi's grandchildren or students of students, and they wrote basically a continued explanation of what Rashi. Sometimes they disagree with him, which is okay. My grandchildren disagree with me at times too. They don't put it in writing, but they do disagree with me. So you have Rashi and Tosfos. Those are the key, and then you have some of the older ones. This one right over here is called Rabbeinu Hananel. He's actually the first one of all the commentaries that are on the page. He lived between 990 to 1055, and he wrote his commentary. And we'll talk about him. Some of them we're going to get into. Then on the top we have what's called Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. That's on the top right on our page. So it's going to be, if we're on the other side, it'll be on the outside. So on the outer edge, Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, and that one he cites references to halacha. So if the topic is discussed, and very often the Gemara is not going to give us the halacha. They don't give us the actual law. They give us the debate, the discussion. But Esther's going to want to know, okay, what's the law? So this commentary, Ein Mishpat and Ner Mitzvah, what he'll do is he'll put a little symbol in here, and you can find that symbol. It's like a footnote, and he'll tell you where you can look up what the actual halacha is, and he'll give you briefly what it is. So that's a big help to us. Then you have Mesoras Hashas. That one is telling us the references, because very often you'll find where they'll say they'll cite another Gemara, because the Gemara, the Talmud is a complete system. So even though we're starting from whatever point we start from, but there's a whole system involved. So very often when they will deal with the topic, they'll say, well, this same topic was discussed elsewhere. So Mesoras Hashas tells us where that other place is. And then down here on the, I don't know if you can see past my little lectern, this is called Hagahos HaBach. The Bach is correcting the text, because again, like we said, a lot of times errors came up because it was handwritten, manuscript, and even later on there were photo offset where errors continued. So what the Bach does is that he gives you his idea, at least. We don't always accept what he has to say, but pretty much his corrections on the text itself. And then you have another one called Gilyon Hashas. This is Mesoras Hashas up here, down here, Gilyon Hashas. Same idea, where he's giving you other places that you can look to find information. So it's basically, I guess footnotes is the best comparison to how we operate. We're also, in addition to all these people, we're going to meet a few people here today in our little section, which I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll do the best we can. And by the way, we're not going to go real fast in this group, because it's fun for me to get a little deeper into it. So we're going to do that. We're going to explore primary sources. That's why I put a chumash onto each table, so you guys can share with each other, because we're going to get into why we drink 4 cups, and it's a biblical reference. So you'll be able to see that. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover each topic, each page, till everybody really gets it. So if anybody has a question, or I'm not making myself clear enough, here I am. I'm ready to answer whatever. And so the personalities that we're going to meet on this page, there are 8 of them, and I'll give you a little bit of a sketch of each of them. First one is Reb Yehuda. He is a Tana, which means that he was one of the authors of the Mishnah. Right, the Mishnah is the first part. Right, that was from roughly 50 before the Common Era to about 200. Then you have Rabbi Yossi. We're going to hear Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, you see, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, we'll see all through Shas very frequently. Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was also 2nd century Common Era, because Rabbi Meir is towards the end of the Mishnah period. In fact, when you see a Mishnah which has no author listed, most often that's Rabbi Meir. There's a principle called Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. Stam means without an author, or without it, obviously it has an author, but it's not an author with an attribution. So Rabbi Meir was the student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, remember, assembled most of the Mishnayos, because there was a big proliferation of it. Scholars all over were writing this stuff down. Many of them had notes, many of them had oral recollections. Rabbi Kiva brought it together, Rabbi Meir sort of organized it, and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was called Rebbe, the head of the academy in Bavel, this is around the year 200 or so, put it all into writing. So if most often when there's no author listed, that's going to be Rabbi Meir. Now we get into the Gemara. So the first one that's mentioned is Rav Huna, and he was like the 3rd century. The Gemara was the scholars of the Gemara are called Amoraim, means they like tellers, like they tell us a story. They were from roughly 200 to 500 in the Common Era. So in the 3rd century, roughly the 200s, Rav Huna, and he was the head of the academy in Sura. They were in Babylonia. There was at first Sura and Pumbedisa. Those were the 2 central locations. And Rav Huna served as the head of the academy for 40 years. So he's a very influential figure. We're gonna meet him today. Then there's Mar Zutra. He was the 4th to the 5th century Common Era. So you're gonna think, you'll almost think that there's a dialogue going on between Rav Huna and Mar Zutra, but they lived a long time apart, right? But on the page, you can't tell that. So Mar Zutra was actually the 4th to the 5th century in the Common Era, and he was the exilarch. That's why he gets the title Mar. So he was like the head of the Jewish government in Babylonia. We're going to meet Mar. He was the head in Sura. So remember the Sura and Pumbedisa. So there were 2, not exactly competing, but they were just like, I don't know, New York and Tel Aviv, or New York and Yerushalayim. You have centers of learning. Then we have Rav Pinchas Braid Rav Ami. He was 3rd to 4th century in Tiberias. So we're going to get a reference to what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. What we're studying is called the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, which is the most authoritative, really, and most extensive. A lot of the Yerushalmi, the one that was printed or published in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of it is really missing. There's work being going on right now, actually, to try to restore that, but we are studying the Bavli. But they will refer to scholars who were operating in Eretz Yisrael. So this one is from Tiberias, and then Rav Papa. Rav Papa is one that we're going to see very, very often throughout, as long as we're studying. And he was 4th century, and he was head of the yeshiva in Naresh, which is a town near Sura. So he had his academy. It wasn't the biggest academy, but he was a pretty influential figure. He was a very wealthy man. He was a brewer. He dealt in beer, and he also sold poppy seed. That was his business. So we're going to meet these people. So let's get started. If you can follow this either in the English. In the English, we're on page. Those of you have your own book, it's on page 215. Start opening from the left-hand side, left to right, page 215. And if you want to follow along in the Hebrew, and we're going to flip back and forth. That's going to be page 198, starting from the right side. And then if you have the photocopies, that's pretty easy for you. Okay. So the first word, we run into trouble right away, because the first word, and just take a look for a second at the Hebrew page if you're comfortable with that. The first word is Erev. It says Erev Psachim, the eve of Pesach. But now if you take a look at Rashi and at Tosfos, so Rashi has no problem with Erev. Tosfos doesn't like that, because here we're talking about Psachim, which is plural. Erev is singular, right? So Tosfos doesn't like that. He said if you have a singular, you ought to have a singular adjective. If you've got a plural, the adjective should be plural, right, Marilyn? Right? So you have here, Rashi is okay with that, but Tosfos says that he likes Arve Psachim, and there are 2 different versions. Remember I said that a lot of times there are errors, or because of offset printing or manuscript, it's not too clear. So if you take a look at what they have to say, so the Rashi just goes along with Erev, and Tosfos says, he says, Igar Sinan Arve Nicha. That's okay too. So in other words, if you have the the text, remember the girsa is the text. So we have two different girsa'os here. Rashi's girsa is Erev. Tosfos says Arve is just as good, okay? So it could be Erev, could be Arve. So now, what's the difference? So you say, well, Erev seems to make sense because the first night of Pesach, it's only one, right? So Erev seems to make sense. But Arve could refer to every year. In that case, there's a lot of them, right? So either way, the bottom line is the same. But I just wanted to point out to you that it's our job here to examine every word and not to take anything for granted. And that's the Gemara's approach. They're going to ask, and they're going to want proof. Everything that's being said, you don't have the right, Terry, just because you say so, we're going to accept it. We're going to say, how do you know? And you're going to have to prove it to me. And that's really how they operate. So to start out the Mishnah, it says, Erev Sachem, let's say, just the way it's printed. Samach lemincha, close to mincha. In other words, in the afternoon, close to mincha. Okay, so now it says mincha. There are two different times of the day that we're allowed to daven mincha. Right? So the halachic day is divided into halachic hours. What does that mean? That means that we don't operate on a 24-hour, 60-minute per hour clock. We operate on a 24-hour day, but our day and our night depend upon the light. So if you have, right now, wintertime, the days are shorter. Summertime, the days are longer. But the day gets only 12 hours. Same thing with night. So how do we arrive at that? So what they do is they'll take the total number of minutes from sunrise to sunset, divide that by 12. That's how you get a halachic hour. Okay? So now, when it comes to mincha, when are you supposed to daven mincha? Right? Well, I don't have to worry about it because I get the bulletin from Torah Or. I know what time to come to shul, right? Okay, but suppose I want to figure it out for myself. So they have what's called two types of mincha. One is called mincha gedola, and one is called mincha katana. Right? You have a big one, you have a small one, right? So mincha gedola means a large amount of time between mincha time and sunset. Mincha katana, a small amount of time. And the way that it works is that mincha gedola is at 6.5 hours after sunrise. 5.5 hours before sunset is mincha gedola. That's a big amount of time. Okay? Mincha katana, 9.5 hours into the day, 2.5 hours before sunset is the time. You can later than that too, but that's the time that you would daven mincha katana. So now, which mincha are we talking about? So I'm going to let you know it's mincha katana that we're talking about. But when you see a word, the word could mean more than one thing, and we need to pay attention and ask a question. Which mincha are you talking about? Okay. So okay, samach mincha, near mincha, close to mincha, lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. A person should not eat until it gets dark on Erev Pesach. Why? Because when we want to enter the holiday hungry, Cheryl, right? We want to enjoy the meal that I hate to say it, but most often it's our wives are working, preparing this meal, right? I can say we're all okay, right? But so we want to appreciate that meal, right? So we want to be hungry, and so even now it says afilu ani sheb Yisrael, even the poor person among the Jewish people, lo yochal ad sheyesev, he should not eat until he has the opportunity to be reclining, right? So that means his work day has to be over, and he's going to be sitting down to enjoy the meal like royalty would. And then it says, v'lo yifchasu lo me'arba kosos shel yayin, and he should not drink fewer than 4 cups of wine, right? We all drink the 4 cups, we know that. Now we're going to find out why. And then it says, afilu minat tamchli. Tamchli is like soup kitchen, the food pantry. If you have an individual that is so, unfortunately, so poor that he depends upon the soup kitchen, food pantry, he still has to drink 4 cups of wine. So and there's a difference of opinion here about how that's going to be accomplished. One opinion says that it's the obligation of the food pantry Marsha to provide the 4 cups of wine for him. And some say that it's on him. So if he owns anything at all of value, he would need to sell that in order to have the 4 cups of wine. That's how important the mitzvah is. Okay, so why are we drinking 4 cups of wine? Okay, so now to find out, you can open up your Chumash, and that's this one. And it's a very short passage in the Chumash, so everybody doesn't need one. It's in the Chumash on page 316.
Marcia, please, I have 2. Oh, thank you. Well, he said it's short, so. Yeah.
Okay, and while you're getting there, in the Hebrew version, in the Rashi over here, Rashi is telling us why do we need to have the 4 cups. So he says arba kosos. Right now I'm looking at the Rashi on our page in the Gemara. Okay, and then we're going to go to the Chumash right away. So Rashi says arba kosos, 4 cups. That's the and by the way, when you look in Rashi, you're going to see block letters in bold print. That is the citation of the Gemara itself. After that, you're going to see they call this Rashi script. They say he invented this script, and it's a little bit of a stylized version, and so it's not the same as the regular block letters. So if you see where it says arba kosos, and if you are looking at the Hebrew page, it's the 4th line down. It says arba kosos. Then it says Rashi's explanation. It says keneged arba lashonik ula, that is corresponding to the 4 languages or expressions of redemption, ha'amurim b'golas Mitzrayim, that are mentioned in terms of the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. And then what are they? Votseisi eschem, right? I will take you out. V'itzalti eschem, I will save you, right? Pardon? V'ga'alti eschem, I will redeem you. V'lakachti eschem, and I will take you. And that's in, Rashi says, Parshas Va'era. Okay, so now we're going to open up the Parshas Va'era.
What page did you say?
It's on page 318 in your Chumash. Because, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry?
Deliver you. Deliver is the first one.
Okay, so we're going to work with the Chumash because, again, it's my goal, if we can, to work with primary sources. And even though the Gemara is quoting it, and what they do, when they quote, they'll give us just a fragment of the sentence, and they'll give us just a part of the discussion. And you missing something, or you're okay? You're good. Okay.
I know.
So, what's happening here in the Chumash actually? So the actual references are in Pasuk Vav and Pasuk Zayin, right? 6 and 7. But there's more to know, because if we just take a look at the first passage, it says Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. So right away that should make you wonder that Hashem is speaking to Moshe, and he says to him, "I am Hashem." Like Moshe didn't know, because it wasn't like he was watching on YouTube. I mean, or he had a telephone. Hashem is speaking to him, but now Hashem is telling him his name, right? God has many names, right? And he says, "Va'era el Avraham el Yitzchak el Yaakov bekel shakai." He said, when I spoke to your forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I didn't tell them my name, this 4-letter name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. I told them a different name. I'm telling you now this name, and I want you to transmit that name to the Jewish people. Okay? He says, Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lem. I didn't tell them that name. Why not? So the first name, the name that he used, is a name that Hashem uses when he's making a promise. The word, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, which he says, I am that name, that's when he's keeping a promise. And after all, the fact that the Jewish nation spent time in Egypt That was foretold. The redemption from Egypt was also foretold. And now Hashem is saying to Moshe, I'm about to fulfill the promise. Right? So he says, continuing, V'gam hakimosi es brisi itam, laseis lehem es eretz Canaan. I am about to fulfill my promise to them, to give them the land of Canaan, as eretz negureim asher goruba, where they originally lived, right? Because Yaakov lived in Canaan, and then they came down to Egypt, but now they're about to get that restored to them. V'gam ani shamati es nakas b'nei Yisrael asher mitzrayim avidim osam, v'ezkor es brisi.
I'm sorry, what pasuk are you on?
So I'm on, this is pasuk 5, right. He said, so I heard, Hashem is telling Moshe, I heard what they were suffering, and I remembered my promise, right? Lachain, therefore, Amor levnei Yisrael ani Hashem. Now God says to Moshe, tell them my name. Why? He says, because, and now here's the 4 languages, the 4 expressions. I'm going to take you out from the suffering that you're experiencing in Mitzrayim. Right? And I will save you from that hard labor. And I will redeem you with my outstretched hand. Can anybody guess what the outstretched hand refers to? I'm going to tell you in a minute, but if you don't get any extra points. But if anybody remembers, so that refers to the splitting of the sea with the outstretched hand, right? And then it will be shvatim gedolim, and with wonders. And then it says v'lakachti eschem. That's the 4th. Lila, I've taken you. I will take you for my nation. Okay, so that's the text of the in the Chumash. But we're not going to stop there. Let's look and see what did some of the commentaries have to say about that, right? Because we get the benefit of learning what they all had to say. So if you look, so you don't have this, but that's okay. There is a very famous commentary named Rabbeinu Bachai. He was 13th, 14th century in Spain, and he gives an extensive commentary on the Torah, on the Chumash. And so I'll read to you what he has to say. He's talking about therefore, which is therefore to tell the Jewish people who I am. He says, Achar shahizkir lamala, because I said above, Vayomer od Elokim el Moshe, kosamar el bnei Yisrael. He says, just as I said to Moshe, right? I told you the history, right? Hashem is telling Moshe that he made these promises, and he promised to Abraham and to Yitzchak and Yaakov. So, and then he says, and then Hashem commanded Moshe to explain what was foretold. And then he says, V'tzivo so shi'odiyah Yisrael Hashem ha'miyuchad. Now Hashem instructs Moshe, tell them this name that I'm about to reveal to them. He says, Chazar, he repeated, V'tzivo od kan shi'odiyenu lahem pam acheres, that he should repeat it, tell them again. V'tzivo she'avtiach hasam ba'arba lashona shagula. And now it's time to reveal to the people the promise that was made, right? So that's the 4 expressions which we're about to discuss. What are they? Hotseisi, Hitzalti, Ga'alti, V'lakakti. Ubiserosam bahem arba besoros. And now he gave them the good news, right? Besora tova, right? Besuros tovos, good news. So Hashem gave the people, transmitted through Moshe, the good news that they're about to be redeemed and taken out, right? So so first is that they're going to be freed of all the hard labor, right? And they will be able to stay where they were, because the actual Exodus, the process began 6 months earlier, because 6 months before the Jews went out of Egypt, they stopped working. So imagine the Egyptians seeing these Jews, and they know something's up here, and they're not working anymore. And so that was for 6 months that they stopped working. Hasheni shunif Torah mehem legamre. The second is that they're going to be free of these Egyptians, period. Mitakas reshusam. And not only the Egyptians, but from the domination of anyone else. The Jews are going to be freed from that. Hashlishi, the third, shavticham bekriyas yamsuf. So that's the the outstretched hand, right? That they're going to experience the splitting of the sea. Haravi shev tichem b'matan Torah. So the fourth one is that they're going to be receiving the Torah. So the fact that we all drink these 4 cups of wine is for us to remember that this is what occurred, and every one of us is going to experience this, or to feel as if they experienced it themselves. And so it's the freedom from the servitude, and then it's the Exodus, and then it's the splitting of the sea, and then the fact that we receive the Torah. So that's the 4 cups, and so the Gemara, the Mishnah is saying to us that no matter how well off or how poor a Jew is, on the night of the Seder, we all drink these 4 cups of wine. Okay, so now the Gemara starts, and again, if you're looking in the Hebrew, you'll see there's a large type Gimel Mem that stands for Gemara, right? Because the first part is the Mishnah, and normally when you have a Mishnah inside of a parak, inside of a chapter, it'll start out with the Hebrew letters Mem Taf Nun Yud, this large type. In our case, it didn't, because this is the beginning of a chapter. So the beginning of a chapter, like sometimes in the beginning of a chapter of a book, you have a large capital letter or something to indicate this is the beginning. So the first part is a Mishnah. Now we're about to start the Gemara. So the Gemara asks an interesting question, and the Gemara says, "My area Arve Pesachim. What's the big deal about Erev Pesach?" Right? I mean, I know, and you do too, that Friday afternoon, we're not supposed to eat a heavy meal Friday afternoon, right? We're not supposed to eat very much at all Friday afternoon, right? You guys do that. So the Gemara says, the first question, why are you telling me Erev Pesach? Because there's nothing extra, nothing superfluous in the Gemara. If the Gemara is saying something, it's coming to tell us, to teach us something. It's not a storybook. It's not a a bedtime story or something. Hopefully everybody's still awake. But the idea is, if they make a statement, that's to tell you that there is some contrast. There's something else that you need to know. So the Gemara asks, "My area Arve Pesachim. What is the big deal? Afilu Arve Shabbos Yomim Tovim Nami." Even Friday night, right? Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, the same rule applies, right? So Friday afternoon, or if tonight was going to be Yom Tov, so we might have a nice lunch, but in the afternoon we should take it easy, right? Because we want to go into Yom Tov, looking forward to that Yom Tov meal. And how do we know that? So the Gemara says the Sanya, and they're going to quote a brisa. So remember, a brisa is written by Tanoim. Remember, the Tanoim were the first group from roughly 50 before the Common Era to about 200. And those statements that Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Meir, and then later on Rabbi Yehuda Nasi felt that were the most authoritative or the most necessary were published in the Mishnah. But the others were not abandoned. Those statements still have authority, and very often they'll quote a brisa. Brisa means it was outside. It's outside of what's inside, right? The inside is the text that we have, but these other brises remain, and they're going to quote them, and the author of that brisa is just as authoritative as the author of our Mishnah, so he has a right to contradict the other one, or at least to question what's going on. So the Gemara says, hang on a second, we have a brisa, which the sanya means that there's a brisa we're going to be quoting now. It says, Lo yochal adam ba'arvei shabbosos yomim tovim min mincha ulamala. A person should not eat on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov, in other words, the eve of Shabbos or the eve of Yom Tov, from mincha time and on. You shouldn't eat. Why? Kidei she'yikanes l'Shabbos kishehu tava. Because you should enter Shabbos with an appetite, right? So, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is the author of this statement. So, we're not going to leave it there, because he's not the only one that we're going to quote. Remember we said, here's the next one, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. And the reason that they're mentioning his name is to let you know that there's a little bit of a discussion going on here. He's Ocha v'holech ad shetechshach. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can eat all day, until it gets dark. But I'll just give you a hint, we don't accept that. He's not, in this case, we don't rule like Rabbi Yossi. So now, we have the two statements of the Tanoim, and we have the statement of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, Samach lemincha, near mincha, close to mincha. They quote a brisa which says, what does the brisa say? Is after mincha, mina mincha lamala, from mincha time and on. So our Mishnah says close to it, right? The brisa says at it or after it, and then you have Rav Yossi who says all day until it gets dark. So you have three different. Did you want to say something? No. Oh, okay. So how are we going to resolve this whole situation? So, Amar Rav Huna, now along comes Rav Huna. Now Rav Huna, remember, is the Amora, right? So he's trying to help us to understand the three statements of the three different Tanoim, how it's going to all make sense for us. He says, Lo tzricha ela Rav Yossi. He says, we need to hear from Rav Yossi. Why? Because his statement is different from the other two. The other two, Rav Huna says, are pretty similar. We're going to find out why in a second. So Rav Yossi, Amar Ochav Aholech Ad Shetechshach. He says you can eat until it gets dark. Hanimili, those words means that's, in this case, is Arvei Shabbosov Yom Tovim. That's Erev Shabbos, Friday afternoon, and Erev Yontif. Avol Erev Pesach, but Pesach is different from Shabbos. Pesach is different from Sukkot or from Shavuos. Why? Because the only time in our calendar when you're obligated to eat anything at all at night
Matzah on Pesach.
is Matzah on Pesach, right? So Pesach is different from all the other ones. Because and he says, Mishum chiyuva de matzah. So since you're obligated to eat matzah on the night of Pesach, therefore modeh. So he's saying that in that case, even Rabbi Yossi, who said you can eat all day until it gets dark, he would then go along because Rabbi Yossi knew the mitzvah. He knew it was a mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach, on the night of Pesach, night of the first Seder. So he would agree with the other two. So we can leave him alone for a little while, but we still have to understand what's the difference. Why does our mitzvah say samoch lemincha, and the brisa says mincha olamala, from mincha and on? It's not quite the same, right? Is it the same? No, right? Near is not the same as at. So what's the difference? Rav Papa Amar, so now comes along Rav Papa, another Amora, and he says, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yehuda. We can even understand this according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says what? Rabbi Yehuda says we can go all day, right, until it gets dark, right? He says, Hasam Arve Shabbosos Yomim Tovim. When we're talking about Friday night, Erev Shabbos, and Erev Yontif, Min Mincha Lamala Hudasir. From the Mincha and on is when it's prohibited to eat. Samach Mincha Shari. Near Mincha, it will be okay. So what does that mean? Near, maybe we'll get into that. What does that mean? Maybe does it mean 5 minutes before Mincha, 10 minutes before Mincha, but not exactly at Mincha time. So right, if I'm running late, I can take a sandwich with me in the car when I'm on the way to Mincha, because close to Mincha is okay. Avol be'erev of Pesach, but on Erev Pesach, afilu samach lemincha nami osir. Even near Mincha is prohibited. And then the Gemara asks, Erev Shabbos samach lemincha shari? Oh, wait a second, you're going to tell me that Friday afternoon, near Mincha time, I'm allowed to eat? Is that so? Is that you're going to try to tell me that? And we're going to find out next time.
Well, it's finished, the time went so
Yeah,
fast.
time is up, we're up. So thanks everybody, and we'll be back again, same time, same station, and I think we have 10 students that are on the bus trip,
So
so
where
maybe we
are you
have to
reading
look
from
for
the Hebrew?
a bigger
This
venue.
side is where you're reading, this is
Yes.
where you're reading from here?
So,
I